In this episode of Quakers Today, we ask, what happens in a Quaker meeting for worship?
Rhiannon Grant tells us about her new book, Speaking in Quaker Meeting for Worship: What, When, How, and Why. Sweet Miche and I, along with Paula Christophersen, share our very first experiences in a Quaker meeting for worship.
Peterson will reveal a new worship format he's been experimenting with in his home meeting. It's called Meeting for Worship with Attention to Worship.
And we hear your answers to the question, who is someone you've encountered in fiction that embodies Quakerism, even if they aren't a Quaker or even human? I'm Peterson Toscano.
And I am Sweet Miche.
This is Season 5, Episode 3 of the Quakers Today podcast, a project of Friends Publishing Corporation. The season of Quakers Today is sponsored by the American Friends Service Committee and Friends Fiduciary.
Peterson, when you attend Quaker meeting for worship, what is happening inside your head?
Well, some days my thoughts are like, I don't know, an experimental jazz performed by howler monkeys.
Oh.
Yeah, but if I stick with it, I usually settle in or fall asleep.
That is very vivid. An incredible answer. If you are a longtime Quaker worshiper or someone who's never experienced a mostly silent meeting for worship, today we are going to pull back the curtain and look at the mystery of Quaker worship.
We will do this in unconventional ways, including short stories about Quaker worship and personal experiences. I've attended Quaker meeting for worship since 2001.
And I began in 2019.
So, Sweet Miche, what do you remember about your very first time in a Quaker meeting for worship?
Yeah, I was at Pendle Hill. I had just started my Quaker Voluntary Service fellowship. But when I really sank down into worship, I actually had not quite a vision, but I had a really visceral feeling that a friend who had passed away while I was in college was with me in the room. Before she passed away, she was just so excited about becoming a rabbi, and was one of the only, religious people I had in my life at that time. And I just felt her in that space. And she told me that the Quakers were where I was supposed to be and allow the kind of excitement she had for Judaism. That would be what that excitement would be for me in Quakerism. And what was your first meeting for worship, Peterson?
I remember the exact date, September 16th, 2001, which was less than a week after the 9/11 attacks. It was a strange period of my life because I had just moved back north from Memphis, Tennessee to Hartford, Connecticut, started a new job, didn't know anybody at that job. And literally the second week in school, there are these attacks. And I needed to be with other people of faith.
Yeah.
But I was so terrorized by churches because of my own bad experiences in the past. Fortunately, there was a woman, Diane Weinholtz, who was the head of the middle school. She was out and proud as a Quaker. I went to the Quaker meeting house in Hartford. I walk in, I was a little late, but just when it started, but then nothing started. And I was just like, ooh, somebody forgot to start. I don't know. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know it was quiet. I'd never been. And then I realized, oh no, that's what it is. They just sit quietly. Okay. And nobody spoke. There were
Wow.
no messages. It was a pure hour of silence. I almost think we were stunned into silence. It was a very, very disturbing time in history. And I found it so amazing to be in that silence, enveloped in that silence after years of being beaten up with words in churches, to just be still. And it just felt so right and so good.
Yeah, and Paula Christophersen, a Quaker in Germany, spoke about her first experience in worship in a Quaker Speak video.
At my first ever Quaker meeting for worship, I was late, not knowing what a Quaker meeting house looks like. Does it look like a house people live in? Does it look like a church? And so by the time I'd found it, it was 10 past the hour. So I thought, now I know where it is, I'm just going to come back next Sunday. I'm going to get a bit closer, just have a look. And so I went, and I peeked through the glass window in the front door. And a friend opened the door for me and said, "Do you want to come in?" And so I followed his invitation and went into the meeting room. And I found it surprisingly easy to settle into the silence. Usually meditation is very hard for me. I have a very active ADHD brain who wants to get up to all kinds of things, and just being present on my own is hard. But being in that silence, I felt so comfortable, so calm, so held. And a friend stood up and gave ministry. And there was silence again. A second friend gave ministry. Silence again. I was moving these words in my heart. And then words came, and I told myself, "Oh, this is your ego speaking. You're a guest. You're not here to minister." But my heart started beating so fast. And I remember I kind of found myself on my feet. I don't really remember standing up. But I'd also read that you should trust that words will be given to you. And I did. And they were. Again. And that was a profound experience. And was followed by some more delicious silence. And my first round of tea and biscuits with friends. And I came back the next Sunday. And the Sunday after that. I think the idea of sitting in silence for an hour with people you've never met before is quite daunting to a lot of people. You might fear that it's an awkward silence, or a very boring silence. Nothing much happens. You might be afraid that you're doing it wrong. So I think for everyone curious about it, I just want to affirm that meeting for worship means being together in warm silence, in welcoming silence, in a silence that we stay in because we know what we are gathered around is beyond words, in a silence that acknowledges that we can bring all of who we are, just as we are, into that space. We just have to be open.
That was Paula Christophersen from the Quaker Speak video, My First Meeting for Worship. You can watch the full video on YouTube or at quakerspeak.com. Huge thanks to Layla Cuthrell for filming and editing Quaker Speak videos.
Miche, Paula, and I attend what are known as unprogrammed meetings. With unprogrammed worship, friends sit in silence for about an hour. If someone feels inspired, they will stand and give a message. Some Quakers meet in churches for what is known as programmed worship. This is more what I was expecting in my first Quaker worship service, a conventional church service.
Then there are semi-programmed meetings. These offer a hybrid experience between the unprogrammed and programmed meetings. These Quakers sing hymns and hear a message from a pastor. They also include a period of silent worship where friends center themselves and share messages if they feel inspired. Diana Coe grew up Quaker and later converted to Judaism. In a recent Substack essay, she describes attending a Quaker memorial service and rediscovering the physical memory of worship.
Diana wrote, quote, "In those first few moments, sitting in the bare sanctuary filled with old friends and strangers alike, I remembered. My body, my mind, my heart remembered how to find the inner light, that of God. I centered immediately. My heart rate slowed, my breath quieted, my mind emptied. I found myself smiling, even through the tears, as one after another of us rose in the silence to offer a happy memory of a beloved woman." End quote.
The process of Quaker worship seems mysterious in part because we don't always talk about it. And Peterson, this led you to develop a new format for worship, one that helps open the curtain and reveal what's happening inside people's heads.
I call it Meeting for Worship with Attention to Worship. I'm really excited to share this idea, especially because it can help first-time visitors feel more comfortable in their first experiences of unprogrammed Quaker worship. But before we get there, let's talk a little about what it means to speak during worship. In both unprogrammed and semi-programmed worship, friends sit together in silence, but that silence can be broken when someone feels led by the Spirit to speak.
I actually teach an intro to silent worship at my meeting because there aren't a lot of concrete answers to know how you have a message. But I wanted to give new friends as much of a roadmap as I can.
And that's why I love the title of Rhiannon Grant's book, Speaking in Quaker Meeting for Worship: What, When, How, and Why. Ultra concrete.
Absolutely. And we got to talk to Rhiannon about her book and what ministry is like in meeting.
I'm Rhiannon Grant. I live in Birmingham, where I worship at Bourneville local meeting. I've been a Quaker all my life, and I'm really interested in how we can understand Quakerism well, how we can think about it and talk about it in ways that people can understand.
When Peterson and I were recording this episode, he was talking about this program he's thinking about called the Meeting for Worship with Attention to Worship, which is kind of like breaking down how people settle and like how messages come up and stuff. And I teach an intro to silent worship once a month at my meeting, basically because newcomers were coming in and talking a lot. And I, try to approach it not being like everyone needs to quiet, teaching people that, what a message is. And I encountered not a lot of pushback, but like definitely some pushback within the community. It's like, no, the way you teach this is to model it, is like not to like teach people.
I've definitely encountered this. I have been told outright, meeting for worship isn't something you can teach. It's a practical skill, and I think people sometimes have a picture of teaching as lecturing, and I say to people sometimes, well, if you can't teach a practical skill, how do you have a driving lesson? Because of course we do teach and learn practical skills all the time, and sometimes we do it by modeling, and sometimes we do it by experimentation and reflection, and sometimes we need a combination. That process of reflection is really important, and actually giving really good, deep, grounded ministry is a gift, but also a skill. And we can learn to be better at it. And there are specific things we can do to practice, to be more deeply, more fully engaged, and to be really ready to receive and pass on that gift when it comes. In a programmed context, you maybe even are expected to prepare to some extent. But in unprogrammed worship, we aim for ministry to be spontaneous. And that doesn't mean that we're not prepared at some level, because our whole lives are part of our worship, and our experiences and the things that are happening around us and what our attention is drawn to in the moment all contribute. But we haven't planned it, we don't prepare it, we don't know in advance what's going to happen. And that, on the one hand, gives it this huge openness. It can also make it quite risky. And people might say things that afterwards they think, I shouldn't have said that. And they might say things that other people think, why did you say that? And we have to be open to that. And sometimes I feel like I shouldn't have said that, but actually it was right to. Other people, some of them don't understand why I said that, but maybe there's one person in the room who needed to hear that and it was still right to say that. So it leaves us in quite a vulnerable position of having to trust that we're being led rightly, that we're following those leadings rightly, and to take those risks and see what happens. And I think one of the temptations around that is to try and control it. And of course, the spirit isn't like that. So one of the things that happens with unprogrammed worship is it's officially unprogrammed, but we develop what I might call bylaws, guidelines, suggestions that are meant to help or that respond to a particular situation and gradually build up these layers and layers to the point where if there are bandages on a wound, eventually they stop you moving at all. And it can get that the ministry is being restricted by the things which were meant to support it. So I have a friend who's been a Quaker for a very long time who says that in her experience over time, people have kind of raised the bar on ministry. And the more that you say things like, you must wait till you're pushed to your feet, you must not minister unless you can't avoid it, the more you raise that bar and the more you make it difficult to speak. And some people will kind of overcome that, whether they're right to or not. And some people who should speak might be put off by that. So I think it's really important to recognize that we're all individuals and different people are going to experience a leading differently. And it's about getting to know what, for me, is a genuine leading. So for some of us, that might be a physical feeling. It might be actually shaking and trembling. For some people, it might be a much more emotional thing. For some people, it might be a more intellectual or wordy thing that what you need to say arrives fully formed in full sentences. But for other people, it might be a colour or a sensation. Different brains and bodies are built and wired differently, and we need to allow for that individual variation while also supporting people through the process of maybe experimenting. And that means accepting that sometimes I'm not going to say something I should have said because I'm experimenting with whether I can avoid saying it. And sometimes I'm going to say something that I shouldn't have said because I'm testing, is this a real leading? And I act on it a bit too soon. And so we need to be very tender and gentle with one another and accept that meeting is a space where we are allowed to make mistakes because we're human. And also we can go on practicing and we can go on working on this and improving our sense of what makes it leading for me as an individual. And that has to be something that happens over time. What's the purpose of having ministry in meeting for worship? As with meeting for worship more generally, there might be many purposes for the many people who give ministry. Wanting to share, wanting to teach, wanting to connect, feeling that one must speak, feeling that it's right. And there could also be no purpose or no purpose known to us. We give ministry when we're led to do so, and it need have no purpose for us beyond following a leading. That said, I think we can discern some of the purposes which ministry can serve in worship. It can complement and enrich the silence. By giving us some shared words, it can focus our attention. We can be surprised and challenged by what comes up in the unprogrammed worship. And when a message is articulated in spoken ministry, this effect is heightened. It can be difficult to listen to, and that can be a benefit. Ministry can remind us that unprogrammed worship is not merely a time of rest or of peace and quiet or of individual meditation, but a shared activity in which we are holding open a space for the Spirit to move. The purpose of ministry, then, might be understood as deepening the silence of meeting for worship. Speech which deepens silence might seem counterintuitive, because in ordinary contexts we think of speech and other sounds as breaking silence. In order to understand this, we have to both have a good grasp of the role of silence in meeting for worship and how ministry differs from other kinds of speech. In meeting for worship, although some physical silence helps, it is not a physical silence we're aiming at, but an inner stillness and calm, which enables us to listen more attentively. We can hold meeting for worship and have that experience, even in situations where our surroundings are very noisy. For example, I've attended meetings for worship held on busy shopping streets, and the sense of connection to the inner quiet can be very strong. It might not be what we'd choose every time, but it can be both a powerful act of witness. Standing still amid the hustle and bustle made a clear point about opting out of environmentally damaging consumerism, and a powerful spiritual experience. Quaker silence is a tool, a useful practice, rather than an end in itself. That means that speech within that practice is part of, rather than breaking or lessening, the experience. If we think about silence in a theatre performance, we can understand that the audience talking breaks the silence, but it's right that the actors speak when the time comes. In a meeting for worship, there is no audience. Anyone present may be given something to say.
That was Rhiannon Grant, author of the Quaker Quickbook, Speaking in Quaker Meeting for Worship. What, when, how, and why.
Sometimes visitors or newcomers walk into unprogrammed Quaker worship and have no idea what's happening. It can feel mysterious, even intimidating. So I've been working on a way to make that experience more welcoming, especially for first timers, young people, and those who are just learning the rhythm of Quaker worship.
You've got my attention. What's the idea?
Yeah, it's called Meeting for Worship with Attention to Worship. It's a special kind of unprogrammed meeting designed to help people see what's happening behind the silence.
Whoa. How does it work?
It takes a little planning. The meeting first chooses a date and two volunteers who will help open and close the worship. At the normal time, everyone gathers and settles into quiet for about 5 minutes. Then the two volunteers stand. One might say, "Welcome, friends. Today we'll experience meeting for worship with attention to worship. We'll pull back the curtain on what happens in our hearts, minds, and bodies when we sit together in silence." Then the two volunteers briefly share how they personally settle into worship, how they center, how they find stillness. And after that, they might say, "We'll sit in worship for the next 45 minutes. If you feel led to speak, please rise and share your message. You'll know our worship has ended when one of us begins greeting our neighbors." When the worship does end, the two greeters speak first. They describe what their worship was like, where their minds went, what they felt in their bodies, what distractions or moments of clarity they noticed. Then everyone introduces themselves. People can share a bit about their own worship experience, but they don't have to. After introductions come announcements. And I think it would be great if everyone introduced themselves that day, right? And of course, a potluck, right? We
Of
do that
course.
a lot. During lunch, committees then set up tables and displays so newcomers can learn more about the life and work of the meeting.
Whoa. I love that. It feels so accessible, but it's also just a regular meeting for worship with a gentle guide built in.
Exactly. And it uses the same time and structure the meeting already has. Same childcare, same heating or cooling, same space, but it opens the door wider. A meeting might want to do this quarterly. And once friends know the format, they can invite family, neighbors, or anyone who's been curious about Quakers. It's a simple way to make worship visible and welcoming without changing its heart.
Yeah, I love that. And Quakerism at its heart is such an experiential faith. In my intro to silent worship, I could talk all day long about silent worship, but it does really take actually worshiping to gain insight. And Peterson, I remember the very first episode of Quakers Today. You were hosting solo back then. I was barely a twinkle in your eye. And you spoke with author Anne E.G. Needham, Quaker writer and block print artist. She read from her story, The Conduits, about a young woman having a mystical experience in meeting for worship.
That was 3 years ago when this podcast began. And here's an excerpt.
The first time Maggie saw the Conduits, she was 9 years old. sitting in meeting for worship, bored by the stillness and the silence as always, and idly counting the flowers printed on her mother's skirt. Vera Penny stood up. "Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God," the old woman said, her thin hand making a gesture as if she were scattering a handful of birdseed. Maggie blinked at the glowing ripple that spread through the air where Vera's fingers traced their arc. She stared as the conduits came into focus. Glowing lines spreading from Vera's hands, face, and powder blue cardigan toward everyone else in the meeting room. "Who has seen the wind?" Vera went on. "Neither you nor I. But when the trees bow down their heads, the wind is passing by. So with the divine. We know God is there, not because we see God, but because we see the effects of love moving through the world like wind." Maggie looked down at her own chest and saw the light touching her. She felt an unexpected warmth as she realized that there were more lines, channels between her and her parents sitting beside her, her friend Sora across the room, and Mr. Price, who always asked what book she was reading and really listened to the answer. The harder Maggie looked, the more lines she saw, until there were lines connecting each person with every other person, heart to heart to heart. Then she noticed John Barlow sitting on a bench by himself. He sat in a shadow, none of the threads of light quite reaching him, as if a hole were torn in the web. Maggie's focus sharpened, and she saw not just glowing threads, but streams of light flowing through clear conduits toward John. But just before the light reached the man, something hard and jagged blocked the flow, so that he seemed tense with cold in his walled-off hollow where the light couldn't reach.
I love how Anne uses the conduits of light to reveal what's usually invisible in our worship. It made me wonder, if I wrote a story set in a Quaker meeting, what metaphor would I use to describe the musical experience of worship, or whatever kind? That question led me to my short story, Penn's Creek, published last year on friendsjournal.org.
You created a whole world inside a small Pennsylvania meeting, one that felt stagnant and dry, both literally and spiritually.
Yes, it takes place during a scorching drought. Without warning, a wet patch appears on one wall of the meeting house and keeps growing. Now, this is weird because the building has no plumbing. It's on a hill and hasn't rained in weeks. It's just no explanation. It's just weird.
And you bring in newcomers who shake up the meeting. And then there's poor Terry, the 27-year-old on building and grounds, who suddenly has his hands full.
Yeah, after all the heat, drought, and the inner tension, the story ends with a touch of magical realism. It's a blending of the ordinary and the impossible that reveals something true about the soul. And you can find a link to Penn's Creek in our show notes.
The November 2025 issue of Friends Journal features more Quaker-themed fiction and poetry. No surprise, several take place in a meeting house during worship. Lillian Edmonds' story, My Ghosts, follows a woman nearing her 80th birthday, remembering her childhood and meeting.
It is such a moving story. And this woman recalls, quote, "I have always wanted to live in the olden days. I used to sit in the meeting house and drift away to visit other times, many years before I was born, times I recalled when I smelled the aroma of silence and the scent of old furniture permeating the room."
Jonathan Doring also gives us vivid history in a story, A Fine Showing for the Court of Owls. It features radical Quaker abolitionists Benjamin and Sarah Lay. Both were just over 4 feet tall and had witnessed the horrors of slavery in Barbados before settling in Pennsylvania.
Starting in 1730, Benjamin Lay publicly condemned Quakers who owned slaves. At Philadelphia yearly meeting, one time he burst into the room dressed in military gear, pierced a book that looked like a Bible with his sword, and red pokeberry juice that looked like blood splashed everywhere.
That may have been the loudest meeting for worship with attention to business in history.
And the most violent. I think they physically threw him out of the building.
Whoa. In During's story, Benjamin tells Sarah about the event. Quote, I dare say it's not every day a man disrupts Philadelphia yearly meeting. I shuffled through the throng into the meeting room. All around were Quaker worthies dressed in their first day frills and finery. My heart clenched at those haughty so-called Quakers, Sarah. So many owls and dragons wrapped up tight and respectable with the softest shoe leather and finest cloth. And Peterson, you also have a story in this issue. It opens inside the mind of a snarky teenager sitting through worship.
Yeah, it's called What is Actually There? The story begins, Here we go again, Jordan groaned as Longfellow stood to his feet during the Quaker meeting for worship. What's it going to be this time? Jordan wondered. A flood? A fire? A plague of locusts? Didn't anything good happen in the past? For 6 weeks straight, the old man, Longfellow Niederlander, such a stupid name for a short person, Jordan thought, shared a prepared message about a particular disaster humans faced and how Quakers responded. Jordan fumed. We're not even supposed to share made-up messages. Whatever happened to inspiration from the heart or the spirit or whatever?
You'll find Peterson's story, along with others and a collection of poems, in the November 2025 issue of Friends Journal, or online at friendsjournal.org. As always, we'll have links to our show notes at quakerstoday.org.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Quakers Today. If you like what you heard today and you listen on Apple Podcasts, please rate and review our show. You can do that on Spotify too. Many thanks to everyone who's been sharing Quakers Today with their friends and on social media. Quakers Today is written and produced by me, Peterson Toscano.
And me, Sweet Miche. Music on today's show comes from Epidemic Sound.
Season 5 of Quakers Today is sponsored by Friends Fiduciary. Friends Fiduciary unites Quaker values with expert investing. They serve more than 460 organizations with ethical portfolios, shareholder advocacy, and a deep commitment to justice and sustainability. They're a Quaker nonprofit offering cost-effective professional investment services to Friends meetings, churches, schools, and organizations. With 5 value-aligned portfolios managed by SEC-registered firms, every holding is screened for Quaker values. In 2024 alone, they distributed $16 million to their constituents. Learn more at friendsfiduciary.org.
Season 5 is also sponsored by the American Friends Service Committee. AFSC works at the forefront of social change to meet urgent needs, challenge injustice, and build peace. For over a decade, AFSC has supported divestment campaigns worldwide. Today, its Action Center for Corporate Accountability works to expose and reduce corporate involvement in mass incarceration, immigrant detention, border militarization, and the Israeli occupation. Visit investigate.afsc.org for resources to help you divest from corporate-sponsored state violence. Learn more about other initiatives and actions at afsc.org.
Visit quakerstoday.org to see our show notes and a full transcript of this episode. And if you stick around after the closing, you'll hear listeners' responses to the question, who is someone you've encountered in fiction that embodies Quakerness, even if they aren't Quaker?
Thank you, friend. May you experience peace and clarity in the silence. In a moment, you'll hear listeners' voicemails responding to this month's question.
But first, let's tell you what we're asking for next month. Here's the question. What do you believe now that you didn't believe before becoming a friend or before encountering Quakerism? Let me say that again. What do you believe now that you didn't believe before becoming a friend or before encountering Quakerism?
We'd love to hear from you. Leave us a voice memo with your name and the town where you live. The number to call is 317-782-5377. That's 317 Quakers. You can also email us at podcast@quakerstoday.org or podcast@friendsjournal.org.
And of course, feel free to leave a comment when you see this question pop up on our social media pages. All these details are in our show notes over at quakerstoday.org.
Now we hear your answers to the question, who is someone you've encountered in fiction that embodies Quakerness, even if they aren't Quaker? They could come from a book, comic, cartoon, film, TV show, or video game.
So, Sweet Miche, I've been asking people this question, and then they were like lost. They were like, we don't know. And last month, I mentioned Dinah from George Eliot's Adam Bede, but I've changed my mind. My answer now is Gumby. Have you heard of Gumby before?
I have. I had a little, I don't think I've ever seen it, but I had a little Gumby figurine growing up.
Okay. So, Gumby is a claymation character from the 50s. Gumby is curious, kind, quietly persistent. He bends, but never breaks. Gumby, his family, his friends, they approach the world with imagination, compassion, and a deep, steady sense of peace that feels a lot like Quakerism in motion.
I need to check out some of Gumby on YouTube. And I was thinking about my answer all month, and despite having some serious critiques I have of the movie, Wall-E really speaks to my condition as a Quaker.
That robot movie, Wall-E.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
But his whole purpose is to restore our Earth. And in the whole movie, he never chooses to fight, but he chooses to repair things and persist despite threats. I also asked this question to Rhiannon Grant.
My answer is that there are many fictional candidates, but one of them is Jedi characters from Star Wars. And the case I would put is that Qui-Gon Jinn is the most Quakerly Jedi, because at the same time as belonging to this ancient order who value their tradition and their ways of doing things, he's also connected to the living force, in Quaker terms, moving with the spirit, doing things that break the rules, even gambling when the occasion calls for it, in order to support peace and justice.
We also received several responses to this question on our social media pages.
So from Facebook, Dee from South Africa, who's also my mother-in-law, wrote, I love the Pooh Bear books by A.L. Milne. The characters are kind, never judge, and don't try to change each other. They love supporting each other and really live in the now. I vote for Pooh Bear.
Vaughn New chose Maisie Dobbs, the main character in Jacqueline Winspear's series of historical mysteries. Vaughn writes, she's a post-World War I private investigator and psychologist based in London, using her keen intellect, psychological training, and empathy to solve crimes.
And Cree Burkander offered another wonderful example, Ted Lasso. Which is a TV show I've never seen, but now I need to because Cree writes, one of his slogans is to be curious, not judgmental. He's a delightful character, and the whole show is just fantastic. He leads with his heart, and though people often think he's naive, the community he builds allows everyone to shine. It's a beautiful reminder that Quaker values are sorely needed in our hurting world.
We also received a thought-provoking email response from Frank Bishop in Virginia, who chose Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. Frank writes, Dorothy is swept up into a world she doesn't recognize and finds the courage to follow the yellow brick road, a path that feels a lot like the Quaker journey. Along the way, she brings together the Scarecrow seeking wisdom, the Tin Man longing for a heart, and the Lion searching for courage. Together, they pull back the curtain to expose the truth behind the Great Oz. To me, Dorothy stands for courage in the face of tyranny and deception. That courage has marked Friends since the 1600s, especially the women who carried truth and light into the world at great personal risk. Dorothy reminds us of that spirit.
I never would have thought of Dorothy. Thank you to everyone who shared your reflections. We love hearing the voices and the imaginations of friends around the world.
And remember, you can always join the conversation. Leave us a voicemail, send an email, or comment on social media. You'll find all the details in our show notes at quakerstoday.org.
Or you can make me extra happy by leaving a voicemail. I know it's scary. You can do it. The number is 317 Quakers or 317-782-5377. Look at quakerstoday.org. You'll find it.
Yay.
Thanks. Don't forget to
Thanks.
read good fiction.